I think the reason why there is such a challenge in dialogue is that people are afraid of being changed. They hold so staunchly to their beliefs because I think there's a true fear there. Because I went into that conversation saying, I'm willing to be open. I'm willing to change my mind. I'm willing to change my heart. I'm just open.
Welcome to Rebuilding the Village, a podcast that seeks to explore the causes of modern problems by examining the roots of our metaphorical village through the systems and structures in society that may have been disrupted in the technological and industrial era that we inhabit. Thank you for joining me today.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Not too bad. Can't complain.
You seem a little tired.
Probably could have slept better. Maybe it's the lighting on the eyes. I'm still trying to get everything set up. This is literally just my apartment with a black background and the microphone. The podcast is very, very, very early stages right now, so we're just kind of getting it off bit by bit. So we did a little bit of research into your side of things. It looks like you are the compassion queen.
Oh, I wouldn't call it queen, but I do. Compassion is my passion. So compassion and self-love. Yeah.
How did you get into your line of work?
That's an interesting question. I was burnt out. I had been working in leadership at a children's aid society, and it was my dream job. I had finally gotten to the point where I was in my dream job, and I was burning out. I was so not happy. I was working nonstop. And I had always wanted to make a difference in child welfare. But I didn't know how until I sort of stumbled on compassion. I can't even remember how it ended up coming to my awareness. I think I was reading the Dalai Lama and so on. Long story short, I worked really hard to introduce compassion into the child welfare system. And there was it was not working. I was being fought at every stage of the game. And I thought maybe this isn't what I'm meant to be doing. And so I had an opportunity to leave and do this sort of full time. And so that's what I did. I was done. And so as I worked on myself, I started seeing how compassion and love can transform the most challenging circumstances, my own first and then other people's. And in my podcast, I interview people that have experienced the most extraordinary things, like losing their children or facing assault, and how they used compassion in those moments to shift the circumstances and to kind of alchemize them into gold. And I thought, wow, this is something. And so my interest has really been in how to bring compassion into difficult conversations and why. Because when I was in leadership, one of the departments I managed was HR, and I saw the division. I saw how people that bullied other people saw themselves as victims. I saw when people were coming together to address issues of race and equity, how people, because of shame, especially like people that are white, they didn't know how to manage that shame or the guilt and all those difficult feelings. And so they would shut down conversations. But when you deal with those difficult moments with compassion, you can stay in the conversation longer. And I thought, oh, wow, this can really help us come together instead of being so far apart the way that we are now with the cancel culture and so on. And so that's my passion. I recently did a TEDx talk, which should be coming out imminently. I'm waiting for it. I'm like, okay, come on. It should be coming out imminently, posted on the site. And it was about that. It was about some of the stories that I had heard and experienced myself about the transformative power of love. And so I'm currently writing my second book. I wrote my first book a year ago, I think. And now I am doing my second book. So that's a little bit about me, a kind of long-winded story.
I like it. So, yeah, I know I've read through some of your blog posts, and one of them that came across was this idea of how it was so challenging to love ourselves and why. I was curious as to what your perspective as to why that is. What's that? Because that seems like it'd be a logical step into, like, before you can even learn to take somebody else's opinion and perspective, you have to be able to just keep your own grounded before you can go into someone else's space.
Yeah, it's so funny because we've been taught that loving ourselves is narcissistic and that it's weak or that it's like fluffy or that it's like woo woo. And it's really, really ridiculous. Like, I mean, I remember growing up, you had to be other focused, you had to be of service, you had to do all those things. And so I continuously saw people that burnt out, that they gave to people when they didn't want to. And then that led to resentment. But loving ourselves is one of the hardest things that we can do, especially when we don't feel we deserve it. I have hurt people in my past, the same that other people have hurt me. And to actually have to, in the TEDx talk, I share my experience with shame and have to face the people that I had hurt and the shame that I experienced and how hard it was to actually look at those emotions. But as I gave myself kindness and love and compassion, I started to be able to sit with them and to be able to learn from those emotions. And so it can feel hard because, especially as kids, we sometimes internalize what happens to us. Like if our parents yell at us or if our parents are neglectful or if they're abusive, we think it's our fault, not anything to do with them. But people can only love us to the level that they can love themselves. And so kids just habitually internalize because they're very me-centered. And so we think I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, nobody's going to love me. And so we don't even fathom that we could love ourselves and give ourselves that which we're seeking out externally. We're not taught that. And so this whole thing about learning to love ourselves, it's more of an unlearning, because I do believe that's our true essence. Like when kids are born, they just want to love. They do want to love and be loved, right? That's our true essence. But we kind of unlearn that. We become protective of ourselves. We kind of build walls. And so it's an unlearning so we can be our true authentic selves and allow ourselves to give ourselves that love. But when we don't think we deserve it, it can be really, really challenging.
Yeah, I could definitely empathize with that feeling I think a lot of people can empathize with that feeling of not feeling like you deserve something. And it's interesting though, from the perspective of a kid growing, given that they're like you said, they're born with this built-in urge to just want to be loved. And so what are these circumstances that then lead to people feeling like it's almost like an inversion of your own software in a way? It's like saying like, I want to be loved, I deserve to be loved. What's happening that's then reversing that in those kids, which is then carrying forward into adulthood and causing problems in people's lives as a result?
Yeah. And the love that we actually are taught is actually not love. It's expectations. If you, Michael, behave the way I want you to, I'll love you. If you love me back, I'll love you. That's not love. Love is what some people call unconditional, which is I love you despite. I love you even if you don't love me. I love you even if you don't behave a certain way. I just love you because that's who I am. I'm just love. I'm just born to love. But that's not what we're taught. We're taught because I love you because. And until we can shift that, it makes loving hard because people aren't going to meet our expectations. They're not always going to be loving. They're not always going to be forgiving. They're not always going to behave in the way we want them to. And so it starts with teaching kids what true love really is. And then living from that place. But it can be really challenging because we have all of these unmet needs that we want other people to meet. And that's the beauty of loving ourselves. I found the more I loved myself and gave compassion to myself, I didn't need other people to act a certain way. I didn't need them to be different because I was already tapping into what was already within me, and I could love people for my overflow and not for my reserves. I didn't need them to change. And that's a very liberating thought that people don't really realize. They think they really have to grasp at straws in terms of relationships. Does that mean that my relationships are perfect? No. I'm a wife. I'm a parent. My kids know definitely how to test the boundaries of that unconditional love. And there are times when we obviously have difficult conversations, but it's in the coming back together that really solidifies that relationship and that love.
Yeah, I had this thought while I was looking through your content about, in this context, it's like unconditional love, I suppose, on on the baseline that the person's giving it their best. It's like, I would love you to do this, this, and this, but you only got to accomplish one, but you were definitely trying. Even though you didn't complete the second and third thing I wanted to, I could see that you were putting your all into it. But then the question becomes, when does compassion become either ineffective, or when does it actually go way too far in the other direction?
So let's talk about defining compassion, because
Sure.
Myself and my husband have a really different definition of compassion. Compassion historically in the literature has been defined as you see suffering and you want to work towards suffering and you want to address the suffering. But for me and for David, it's really a struggle about, it's focused too much on suffering. And I like Eckhart Tolle's thought about, suffering is necessary until you realize it's unnecessary. And so from our perspective, compassion is allowing all things to be. And that can be really hard. And I used to struggle with this. He and I would have endless conversations about like, oh my God, what about rape and murder and all of these things? And so if you truly understand who we are as human beings, I believe we are multidimensional spiritual beings, not just this body suit that we have. And if you understand that everything is made of source, everything is made of God, source, universe, then everything is source. And everything, therefore, is divine, including those things we have a hard time with. And so allowing all things to be doesn't mean you don't act. It just means that, if I can use a different analogy, that if you're on the boat rowing and you see somebody in the lake, obviously you're going to want to extend your hand and want to help them on the boat. But if they decide not to get on the boat, you're not going to jump in with them and you're not going to force them to get on your boat. You stay on the boat and shine your light and see them as you would want to see them, meaning that they're beautiful and perfect and amazing, which we all are. And again, you can extend your hand and just leave it there. But if they choose not to take it, you can't jump in the water with them, which is what most people do. They suffer while other people suffer. And all they're doing is contributing more suffering. And so that is the true essence of compassion, being able to witness that suffering and seeing people beyond that suffering, helping them if they want you to. You extend your hands and say, you know what? I see you suffering, but I also see your perfection in your willingness. Do you need some assistance? No, I don't. Okay, I'm still going to hold the space and the light and the vision of you in your highest potential, so that if you want to align to that, it's there waiting for you. And if you're not ready, then I'm not forcing my own beliefs on you. And that is the caveat of compassion. I've seen very many compassionate people that then turn because people don't change. I was talking to a person experiencing homelessness or unhouseness, it's now the term. And he was telling me about how, we were talking about his experiences. He was talking about some of the reasons that he had chosen homelessness. And he was telling me about how sometimes the most challenging people that he experienced were the people that helped him. And I was like, how so? Because he would say, these people would give me money constantly, and then it eventually get frustrated that I was still there. And so they were giving money with attachment. Here, save yourself. I'm giving you this money. You have to change. But he said, if you're giving me the money, then give me the money. And, just because you want to do it, because you love me, because you're experiencing this. But he taught me about that, about how our expectations, because I was one of those people. That would want to help with expectations. You have to then save yourself. You have to. And that's not true love. And that's not true compassion either. That is expectation. And so then we go back to that non-loving stance of, I expect you to change. And that's the only way that I love you.
I wonder, just like a hypothetical, in the context of people that are self-destructive, I guess is the best way to say it. Thinking about at what point do you say you have like a family member who's addicted to a particular drug, and you decide we're going to literally have to forcibly take you to a rehab or intervention. At some point, it's like, I'm compassionate about the fact that you may not want to change, but you're also in a state of mind that you are not even capable of making the decision to change at some point. do we then step in to make the change for you?
Yeah. So thank you this is a great question. Let's talk about the fact that compassion, first of all, does require boundaries. And so if people are hurting you, it is a very compassionate and loving thing to yourself to say no. I always say, like, a no to someone else is a yes to you. And so being able to say to people, I love you, and I can love you from a distance, that I can release you with love, but I am loving myself enough not to engage in this sort of negative situation. But if you have a family member, I'm a mom. And so as a parent, sometimes my kids are going to do things that I find difficult. And I really have to learn and had to learn to let go. What I mean is, your kids, your family members aren't always going to act in ways that you think are right for them. They might even harm themselves to the point where they might end up dead. Again, if you stay on the boat, you're going to extend a hand out and say, I'm here for you. I'm worried to help you. This is what's going to happen if you take this path. But ultimately, this is their life. Ultimately, this is their choice. Now, if you're someone like me that doesn't believe in death, I do believe that people have a second chance at doing something else. If they don't learn the lesson in this lifetime, they get to choose. But that's something I believe. Not everyone's going to believe that, and that's okay. But for me, in order for my children to live their best lives, I have to trust them enough to know and to believe that they're going to make good choices. And that's the same with family members. I actually, I'm going to say something which is a little bit out there, but I'm going to share it anyways. So I'm a follower of someone called Neville Goddard, and he really believed in like manifestation and really believes in, like reality creation. And so when I would read his books, I would be like, oh, this is really interesting. And one of the concepts he talks about is reimagining people. And so what often happens is we see somebody make a mistake, and then we think that's who they are. And that's the mental image that we carry of them. And then because the mind doesn't like to be wrong, we confirm what we believe about them. Even though sometimes they'll act in different ways that doesn't confirm that, we'll disregard that and say, oh no, this is just a one-off, or they're doing it for another reason. So in our minds, we hold that same image of them. But what I've even done in my own life is reimagine the people as I would like to see them, as I would love in their highest light. And I do find people change. Sometimes people don't want to align to that change, and that's their choice. But the most loving and compassionate thing we can do is hold that highest vision of them. I'll give you a very plain example. And then we can talk about like a bigger one. So one example is, I'm a prof at a university. I had submitted all the marks, and I had a student that texted me and basically said, I'm really upset about my mark. I can't believe where you got this. And so they were very angry when they had sent the email to me. I emailed them back and explained the breakdown of how I had gotten to that point. And then I went on holiday. I was on holiday at the time. And so then when I came back, the email that I got was even more angry and Jared. And I started to go into like the fear, because this is what we do, right? We immediately go, oh my God, do I have to like redo my marking scheme? Do I have to explain this to the dean? Blah, blah, blah. Because I'm contract faculty. I'm not full-time faculty. And so I said to myself, okay, stop. We're not going to do that. We're going to put all our energy and attention on what we want to create. So what do I want to create? And so right before bed, or you can do this early in the morning, I decided that everything was going to work out beautifully, that it was all going to go well, and that the student really cared about me and I cared about them, and that it was all going to be resolved just like that. And I went to bed feeling good. Before that, right before bed, I did send them an email and said, I'd be happy to chat with you to explain my marking scheme, because you're important to me and I care about you. And so I'm willing to take the time out to explain for as long as it takes. And then I sent it. I went to bed having the feeling that it's already addressed and it's already okay. Then a few days later, I don't hear from the student. There's nothing. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen. I totally forgot about it, actually. I kind of let it go. I completely released it because in my mind, in my heart, it was already addressed. A few days later, I get an email from that same student that says, "Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Everything is resolved. No need to meet. I think you're the most compassionate person and a beautiful person. Thank you so much for everything you've done for me." And so in my life, I have had experiences like that, even with my children's, sometimes their willingness to clean. I revision, I revise it. That's what Neville Goddard called it. I revise it. I call it reimagining, but I revise it and say, no, you know what? These people are wonderful. These people can change. These people can succeed. They don't always have to be that way. I can believe that they can be successful. I can believe that they can heal themselves. And that actually helps people more than us forcing our will on them, because then we're not loving them. We are trying to get them to behave in a way that we want them to. And the other thing that I've learned in my experiences is we have no idea why people are experiencing what they're experiencing. You have no idea what their soul chose to do in this lifetime. Maybe that was their choice. Their choice is to face drug abuse. Maybe their choice is to have all of these experiences. You have no idea what their soul wanted to do. So you interfering implies you know more than they or their soul do. And so again, if you're guided to help, then help. Put out and keep putting it out. You don't have to just do it once and say, well, they didn't take it. Continue to put it out. I do that with my kids. I continually offer them and say, hey, do you want some assistance? Do you want some assistance? Sometimes they'll be like, no, go away. Other times they'll be like, yeah, I need this in this moment. And then they get to the habit of reaching out to me when they need me. But I can't force myself on them. It creates such a constricting life for them. It means I don't believe that they can be successful, that they can live magical lives, that they can do all of these things. And so that's my approach to it. But, everybody's doing the best they can, including myself.
Yeah, I remember hearing something recently on the podcast talking about one of the best ways to have, I guess, to interact with your kids as they become adults is essentially to ensure that the door is always open, especially as it's reminiscent of me of when you see a little kid at a playground, especially when they're really little. And maybe you're sitting on a bench and then they'll walk like 3 feet away from you and pick up a rock and turn around like, oh, okay, you're still there. Good. All right. And they're going to go a little further and they go, oh, you're still there? Okay, cool. You're still there. But it's metaphorical to almost say, like, even if your kids move 20, 30, 50, 100 miles away, 5 states over, you're still there. The door is still open, but you're not forcing them to come in. You're saying, like, whenever you'd like, I'd love to have you come here more often, but whatever you want to do, whatever works for you, keeping that option, not only for your children, though, but also for other people in your life.
Yeah. And that's what you call secure attachment, right? And I didn't know this because I was very insecurely attached. I grew up with 2 very traumatized people. And I was very traumatized, and I taught my kids that. So I've had to unlearn, and I had to help them unlearn some of the things I taught them early in their life. Because this was way before I had learned love and compassion for myself. This was way before I had addressed my own anxiety and panic attacks with mindfulness and meditation. So some of the energies that I had originally are still present, and I contributed to that. And so it's that having to reteach as I had been learning along. And so a secure attachment is one where if they have a good foundation, they're going to venture out as far as possible. They do look back, but they're going to feel safe to venture into try things. If they're insecurely attached, you're bubbling them, and that's not good for them because they don't live. All they're doing is surviving. And I saw it with my family. I see people that are in survival mode. They can't get past it because all they want is to survive, but that's not living. You can live your whole life and not live. You can just survive. And if that's what you're aiming for, then okay, then maybe that's the approach for you. But if you truly want to live a spectacular life, you got to get beyond survival. And I can't do that to my kids and believe that all I need them to do is survive. I want them to thrive, which means sometimes they make decisions and I'm like, oh, I hope this really turns out. And all I do is, because I can't for myself, is just hold the vision of it being successful for them. That's it. If that's sometimes the minimal thing I can do for them.
Even in the same case, even if it's not successful, barring a major injury or catastrophe, something like that, it ends up being a learning experience. And that's a big problem I think you're seeing in today's day and age, is that people are terrified of making mistakes, because a lot of these mistakes, as I said before, like they're getting, especially with the advent of social media and the internet, it's like if you make a mistake online, it's there forever.
Yeah.
It's you don't get to make a mistake in private. You don't get to, like, maybe you're a young kid at school and you're feeling in a bad mood and you say something bad to a friend of yours, but it's only between the two of you, or maybe three of the people nearby, something like that, and then, oh my God, I can't believe you said that. And then a couple of days later, oh, I'm sorry, I felt bad about what I said. Now somebody's just sitting there recording it at all times, and all of a sudden it circles and echoes around the school, and you get no chance to kind of decompress from that moment.
Yeah, there's no forgiveness. Like, there's so much judgment. But really, what we do to others, we do to ourselves. So we're really just judging ourselves. And I realized this when, like lots of stories, especially on TikTok, have been coming out about Mother Teresa. Oh, she was a horrible person, right? And then when the Dalai Lama made that comment about women, people were ready to cancel the Dalai Lama. It negates everything that good that the person would have done. Nobody is, my sister taught me this when I was very young, nobody is wholly good or wholly bad. We're all kind of a mix. And we want to have these gurus that are perfect, I guess because we're trying to get perfection, but as soon as they fall off the pedestal, we're ready to cancel them. But it doesn't negate anything good that the person did. It also, like, and I think I used this before. I use the flip side. I was listening to someone talk about how bad these people were, and even though they had done so many good things. And I said to them, you know what? If a serial killer did something good, does that negate all of the serial killing that they did? They're like, well, no. And I'm like, well, why does it work in the reverse? Like, why does it negate all the good things that the person did because they made a mistake? And to be honest, most even killers, sometimes they were like a good neighbor, or maybe they were good at taking up the trash. So nobody's wholly good and wholly bad. There are people instances, depending on who they are, that showed like little small elements. And I was reading this documentary, I can't remember where it was, and I remember hearing this serial killer say they actually had to turn off an aspect of themselves in order to be able to do it. So our natural inclination is to love. Our natural inclination is to have compassion and not to hurt other people. People have to actively go against their own grain to hurt other people. So this is why this cancel culture really doesn't work. But your comment on mistakes made me think about, so right now I'm writing something about reimagining education, because the education system's like, it's just not working. And kids are taught at a very young age that making mistakes are a problem. Think about it. They get zeros, they lose marks, they don't do well on the test. But successful entrepreneurs make nothing but mistakes, right? They stumble, they may do something else, and they get up. But that's not, the kids are conditioned to be afraid of making mistakes. And I see it in my students. You should see how they manage. Like if they get a B, that's like horrible. And I'm like, oh, a B is pretty good. But no, like them making mistakes, it's so detrimental. And you can see how it impacts their mental health. And I'm like, this is the change. Like you can't be over a B. You really can't be having such an emotional reaction. There's so many other things, because when you graduate, nobody cares whether you got an A, a B, or an A, right? Nobody knows who was the B doctor and who was the A+ doctor. You're just going to a doctor. So yeah, so that the whole mistakes things is like a big deal. I see it in my kids all the time. It's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, in that capacity, especially with schooling, I think there can be, I wish more people would look at it from this perspective, is this idea of like, don't look at my GPA, look at the trending in my grades. Like I tell you, when I first started college, I was like playing video games, barely focusing, like if I got C's, I was ecstatic. I was like, oh my God, thank God I passed. But then as the years went on, I started to really develop my sense of learning, how to focus, how to study, how I learn best. And then you could see in my reports and whatnot, there was like, C's and then B's and C's and then B pluses and A minuses and A's. And as it went on, it started to go better. And you see this trend going upwards with time. But a lot of people, I think, become so hyper fixated on the moment of like this. And this ties into this interesting idea about emotional permanence, that like the way that you're feeling now, your brain will project that infinitely into the future. thinking like the way I feel now is how I'm going to feel forever. So this is the end of the world. My life is over. When in reality, it's like once you start making enough mistakes, there's this, I don't know what the term is. It's like this negative inverse exponential correlation where it's just like the first few mistakes you make is terrible. And then as it starts to go on, like it gets easier and easier and easier till the point that you're think 100 mistakes a day. You don't even care. You just keep going.
And that's how success happens, is you keep picking yourself up. But the conditioning that we've given our kids is that there's no emotional resilience to make mistakes. When they make it, it's catastrophic. And it's like, when you're like me, you're like your 40s, you're like, well, that's not the worst thing you're going to experience. So you got to be okay with the B- or the C+ or whatever. Right. And the world right now of work is changing so much with AI. Like, it's just that, there has to be a transformation. And one of my best wishes would be how we can help kids really learn that love and compassion, that emotional regulation, the relationships, because relationships really are the foundation of everything. Nobody succeeds on their own. People say, they're self-made, man. Bullshit. I call BS. I call BS. All of those successful entrepreneurs, all of them have people working under them. All of them have had some sort of support by either funding or somebody they knew or a connection. You don't get anywhere without other people. We are so interconnected. Relationships are the thing that matter, and that's the thing that's suffering the most for kids right now.
You mentioned earlier about secure attachment and insecure attachment. I've actually read quite a lot into the theory behind that, but what was your particular experience and how did you feel like you broke through that?
In terms of secure attachment, I was very insecurely attached. I was very anxiously attached to my mother. My mother grew up, she had a lot of abuse and neglect. It was really bad. That's why I got into child welfare. I wanted to save my mother and save myself indirectly. And so I was very anxious. I was afraid of everything, and she was afraid of everything. And so there was no exploring. There was no riding bikes. There was no going places. It was just a fear. And so it was like attached as possible. And that's what I had taught my children before. I had to kind of reparent myself, relearn how to be safe in my own skin. And that's why I learned that safety is an inner thing. People think, I need to feel safe. And no, safety comes from within. When you feel internally safe, you can be in the most unsafe of circumstances, and your internal lake will be just peaceful. And just be like, you know what? Out of this situation, only good will come. But when you don't feel safe, even things that aren't unsafe will feel unsafe. I had the most ridiculous fears, and my husband would be like, "Why are you afraid of that?" Because I didn't feel safe anywhere. I didn't feel safe in my own home. I didn't feel safe in my own skin. And so people are constantly looking for safety outside. Safety is within us. And that's the only way that we're going to get true safety. So I had to learn that for myself, and then create a safe home base for my kids. Then enable them to learn about that I'm a safe space, and our home's a safe space, and how to cultivate a safe space for themselves no matter where they go. And it's a work in progress, right? And I don't always feel 100% safe. I don't. There's still things that I'm afraid of and that I'm working through. But it was when I realized the importance of creating an internal safe space that things really changed for me. From that secure to the insecure to secure.
And I've heard about it's anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and I think disorganized is a hybrid of the two. How did you yourself go about that process of parenting yourself? It's a very powerful phrase to use that a lot of people think, I didn't have good parents growing up, so I am in the way I am. Like, well, you could become the parent that you need to be for you. But then a lot of people, I think there's this, I wouldn't say misconception, this interpretation of, or lack of, I guess when we start teaching kids and teaching people nowadays, is a lack of metacognition. Yeah. Basically, like thinking about, being aware of what you're thinking about, and realizing that with the right circumstances and environment, you could practice to start intrinsically, passively thinking about things you want to be thinking about without having to force yourself to think it, such as overcoming the fear, where it's like, what do I have to do? I have to expose myself to the actual antigen of the fear itself, whatever it may be, until my body just calms down and learns to trust it. And then with that, it's just easy going. But as you were going to say.
Yeah. So how did I go about reparenting myself? The first part is I had to realize it was not a mind thing. It was not a thinking thing. It was a heart thing. It was, so that's for me, that's where I had to flip it. And how I went reparenting myself was I actually started giving myself all of the things I wanted or needed from my parents at any point in my life. And I had to unlearn some of the beliefs, and this goes to what your point about mind. I had to unlearn some of the beliefs that they shared with me, that the world wasn't safe, that people weren't caring, that people are only out to hurt you, that, so a lot of those core beliefs I had to undo, but it was from the place of heart because my thoughts then generated an emotion. And so the feeling is the secret to shift, like to change how you feel about it. So it's not as much thought as it is the emotion. And so I would talk to my inner child a lot. When there were times when she needed her hand held, I would hold my own hand, like through a meditation. But the beginning of it really was meditating and knowing how I felt. I had no idea how I felt in the beginning. I was just going through life on autopilot, and it was a very shut off, anxious autopilot with a very big, huge brick wall around me. So my husband, then boyfriend, said, "So when are you going to take that wall down?" And I'm like, "What wall?" And I was like, "Oh, I have a wall." And so, and I didn't realize, and I also didn't realize how angry I was, how sad, so when I started meditating, in the beginning, it was so gritty. It was awful. It was absolutely awful. It was just, I couldn't even do 5 minutes. Those emotions would come up and I was like, oh, this feels awful. But I stuck in there. And that's one of the things, the key to change is consistency, showing up for yourself consistently. And the truth of the matter is, in the beginning, it doesn't look like you're making any change. And you're like, freak, I've been doing this for X amount of time and I'm not seeing any freaking change. But you still show up and you still do it. And on the nth day, something changes. I don't know when it changes. For some people, it could be the 10th day. For other people, it could be the 3rd year. There's like a flip. I don't know how it happens. But something changes because everything that you had done until then was planting a seed. And then the seed just blooms one day. You don't even know what to expect it. But you had to have shown up at least most of the time for yourself. And that's how it changes. So I was meditating. I was showing up for myself. I was feeding that young little girl who never felt seen, who never felt loved, who felt always afraid, that safety, that security. I would, if I felt like I wasn't held during my difficult moments, I reimagined them in my mind and I would hold myself in those moments. I would give myself what those adults couldn't give me. And I also practiced a lot of forgiveness. I had to forgive my parents for being who they were. They were doing the best they could. They couldn't love me at the level that they could only love me to the level they could love themselves. And they weren't taught. I could just see the generational trauma that had been passed down. They're like, oh yeah, just another piece in the puzzle. And so reimagining helped me sort of address that. It makes me feel like I'm sort of addressing that generational trauma, and hopefully it goes back to all the ancestors. They could feel my love all the way back, hopefully, as I sort of reimagine those experiences. And again, this also comes from Neville Goddard. He sometimes would reimagine his past and he would feel like there was a shift. And I've known some people that have done that. For example, they were poor growing up, and then all of a sudden they reimagined their past and somehow it came out that they had more money than they thought. Like it kind of extraordinary things happen when you do that. But that's how I actually reparented myself. That doesn't mean there aren't times. It's an ongoing journey. It's like an onion. There are times when things come up and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Why is it coming up now? But it's now more from a place of curiosity in terms of like, okay, what's happening here? But again, like those all emotions come up for everyone. They still come up for me. I still get to experience anger. I still experience worry sometimes, like so, all of those things, but they're acknowledged. And then I choose how I want to feel. Again, sometimes I don't get it right, but I can always choose in the next moment. And so I don't get as attached to what's happening. And I feel that that's true power. That's really taking our power back.
Take power over your emotional, maybe not your emotional responses, but how you choose to act upon those emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a really good quote from Louise Hay that you had in one of your blogs. Yeah. It was, everyone is doing the best they can with the understanding, knowledge, and awareness they have in the moment. Yeah.
I wish I had met her. I do. And sometimes I periodically, like during my meditation, I'm like, hey, Louise. Like, I just loved everything about her. Like in terms of, and she was, thank you for mentioning Louise Hay. That was another thing that I did. I reprogrammed my brain by listening to her talk affirmations. I would listen to her talks just because all of those things, all of those messages I received from my parents ongoing and from the people in my life, I'm like, I want to reprogram this. So I would listen to her over and over and over, just talking about like being love and that people are doing the best they can. Forgiveness is the key and all of those things. I would just have her sometimes in the background. I would be doing other things. And again, I'm not saying that this is the solution for everyone. Like my husband, that wasn't his approach to him loving himself. He had a different approach. You have to find what resonates with you and then follow that. A lot of people think, this is the one approach that you have to do. That's crap. That's no. Your heart has your guide map as to how to get there. Just listen to it. Any good coach or teacher or anything is going to tell you or going to help you tap into your own inner wisdom. And then you're going to be like, oh, okay, this is my path is maybe not listening to Ulysses. Maybe I listen to this person or read this book or do something else. And that's your path to you loving yourself. But the guide map is already within you. It's just about like, just going to find it.
Yeah, I've learned about this with meditation in particular, where everybody seems to have this, not everybody, I would say most Westerners, most Americans, when they think meditation, they think are sitting in Indian style on your fan with your hands in this prayer position. Yeah. And some people just go like, I do this for 4 hours straight. I'm not getting anything. What's wrong with me? But I can tell you, like me personally, I'm an overthinker. I love to just analyze and think and process. And I'll read tons. I'll be reading a physical book while I'm listening to audiobook while I'm driving. And so different forms of meditation for me might be going for a walk up in the woods, or it might be, I've had to learn meditation where you're closing your eyes and you're standing on one leg because you're focusing on trying to not fall off that one leg, and it's keeping your mind so focused on the moment because you're so preoccupied that it works great for me. For other people, it might be a little bit too overwhelming in that capacity. Yeah. But how it differs from person to person. Do you know who David Goggins is?
David Hawkins?
Goggins?
Oh, no, not Goggins, no.
This is along the lines, you mentioned how your husband had his own form of meditation. He's an ex-Navy SEAL, and he has a couple books he wrote, but he had a really traumatic childhood. But what he does, he's the absolute peak of borderline crazy of what he can push his body to do. He runs 100-mile races every weekend.
Wow.
He's done literally 3 days in a row, 200+ mile races. He's broken different records and whatnot. But as he'll say, he's an average everyday guy. He's nothing genetically special, but a lot of what he does is just challenging himself and testing himself and just seeing what his body is capable of. He can learn to just overcome those fears, overcome that anxiety, overcome whatever, and be amazed at the things you could do if you can find what works for you. So for you, it might have been like I said, meditation. For him, it's I got to work out some inner demons. I'm going for a 100-mile run. That's just what works for him.
Yeah. And it's so funny because my husband and I were teaching our kids to focus on meditation, and my daughter's I just can't do it. It's just too gritty, too whatever. And then I noticed that when she goes into her art, she's just kind of in a lost world. And I said to her, this is a meditation. You're doing your arts meditation. So it's like you said, not everyone is sitting there on the floor or on their mat doing a meditation. It's different ways of really just silencing the mind so that you can listen to your heart. So so thank you for sharing.
I feel like there's also in some capacity too, practicing the ability to recognize that how you feel now is not how you will feel in the future if you actively do things that you may not think you want to do to make yourself feel better. For example, I'm just notorious. Every day I wake up, I'm just oh my God, this is the comfiest bed ever. I don't want to move. But I'm going to feel like crap if I don't move, and I should go for a walk, but I don't want to go for a walk. And every single time, 10 minutes into the walk, I'm I am so glad I went for this walk. I feel so good right now. Holy crap, this is the best day ever. But it's very commonplace. I think you see with people where they base the same things before with that emotional permanence is realizing how you feel now doesn't mean it's going to project infinitely into the future. And you can work to change your internal state, and also to not judge yourself based on how you're feeling in that internal state in the moment. I notice this I do a lot of like work. I did personal training back in the day, and one common theme you hear people say is like, why can't I just be as motivated as you, as disciplined as you? And it's just like, I'll tell you honestly, some days I don't want to be in a gym. Some days I do not feel like pushing myself. But at the same time, I know from enough experience that if I listen to that voice over and over again, I'm going to fall off track. I'm not going to keep working out. I'm going to gain weight. I'm going to lose muscle. I'm going to hurt myself. And it's just not worth it. So like, I'd rather voluntarily take the short-term discomfort now for the long-term gains of feeling good and consistent and disciplined.
Yeah.
And a similar thing I noticed even with like, I don't do much of junk food at all anymore. And a lot of people tell me, I guess this ties into the compassion thing and knowing where your boundaries are. I don't do junk food anymore. And people say, I'm like, wow, you have amazing willpower. I'm like, no. I have very good foresight, because I know if you put a box of donuts in front of me, in 10 minutes, it's going to be gone. And I just cannot control myself. But that's my body in particular. Like, my self-control for junks and sweets and things like candy and things like that, terrible. So I just stay vastly clear of it at all times. Yeah. And that seems to portray itself as a form of willpower, but the willpower is keeping the distance and the boundary from the thing as far as possible, just so I don't even allow myself the opportunity to quote unquote relapse into that bad activity, so it doesn't ruin my life in other ways.
Yeah. I love that you said that you're not always going to feel a specific way. And that's a conversation that I constantly have with my kids. Like, sometimes they feel a specific way and they think they're always going to feel that way. And I'm like, you're not always going to feel this way. And like you said, like maybe in the beginning is struggle, and then you feel good about it. So I love that, because I think people always think this is always going to feel terrible. This is always going to be bad. This is always like the always never thing. And it's like, no, this feels this way now. I'll acknowledge that this is how it feels in this moment. And it can change at any moment. And that sort of relaxes it a bit. It actually kind of enables you to, like not be so resistant to it.
Yeah. So just thinking. I've come across this idea as thinking about behavioral change and having to. It probably sounds a little better if you describe it the way I think you did, which is more of like in a form of almost like a rebirth or reincarnation. In that, I've noticed with people who are trying to change their behaviors, there's almost this desperation to say something like, how do I get the benefits of the new behavior without changing my current behavior?
I'm sorry, that's awesome. So how do I change by not changing? Yeah,
exactly.
And isn't that like Einstein's definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome?
Yeah.
So one of the things I found in my life, in all of my experiences, is that behavior doesn't lead to changing behavior doesn't lead to long-term change. It does not. It doesn't, because you're still acting at the same level of identity. Once you change who you think you are, when you change your identity, your behavior automatically changes, because your behavior is based on your thoughts, your beliefs, your emotions, and then your identity. The fastest way, the most potent way to change is by changing your identity. And then everything else, your thoughts, beliefs, your emotions, your behaviors change. You have to see yourself as. And that can feel really challenging. When you see yourself as poor, it's hard for you to embody the energy and vibration of somebody wealthy. If you see yourself as not smart, it's hard for you to embody that. But it's in the embodiment where things really shift. And my sister's a perfect example. She went through this weight loss journey, always had issues with weight. And then she decided to start to see herself as an athlete. That's how she's like, I'm embodying an athlete. She works out every day. She does these amazing workouts. She's lost tons of weight. And even when she was still what she considers plus size, people would come to her and say, hey, are you an athlete? Right. And she wore the outfits, she bought the shoes, she embodied that state before she was even that state. And now she's very fit. She's still continuing on her weight loss journey. All of those things, when you start to embody when you start to live from that place, it shifts everything. But when you try to change your behavior, you revert back to who you think you are. So it doesn't lead to long-term changes. That's why diets don't work. That's why all of those things don't work. You have to, Regan Hillier, she's like this Mind Valley big guru, talks about how success is 80% mental, 20% action. And it's inspired action, right? So it's 80% who you think you are. It's 80% what you think that you, and it's not about even believing, it's about knowing. Have you ever known something like the sun's gonna come up, right? Like having a knowing, and I've had those circumstances. Before I got my TEDx talk, I had already done it. So whether I got it or not didn't matter. It had already happened. I don't know why I felt that. I just did. And then it happened. And it happened to me a number of times. I desired something and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to see myself as having it. I have it. Then I let it go. It totally came through. It was like a gold medal for my master's thing and I have it. It's right behind me. And so it's about shifting who you think you are, your identity, and then everything else falls through. Like some programs focus on changing your thoughts and your emotions. That's great. But shifting your identity is the most long-term, but it's also the most challenging, I would say. Because often we base who we think we are on the external circumstances, right? If I only have $5 in my bank, I'm poor. It's hard for me to say I'm rich if I only have $5 in my bank, right? But the most extraordinary people, like when I think about Viola Davis, who was very, very poor, she grew up in Raston Fenton or whatever. She saw her life beyond those circumstances. That's how you change. You got it. You can't follow reality. Reality is like, meh.
Well, I wonder where that comes from too, because a certain point of perspective on like the fact that like it's like your ego, and your ego has this amazing ability to attach itself to your current identity, and it's very difficult to detach into a prospective future identity of who you could be.
Yeah.
And in a sense, what I was saying before was this concept of like, how do I change my behavior without changing my behavior? Or how do I get the benefits without getting the benefits?
I love that. Yeah.
But I think in a way, there's different perspectives on this. And I said things earlier. I said we were talking about rebirth and reincarnation and things like that. And it, like, if you're doing some kind of internal rebirth, there's also implied in that some form of an internal like death. And it's like the old version of you has to die to make room for the new version of you.
Yeah.
And that process can be physically, mentally painful, psychologically painful in different ways, that you have to let go of who you were voluntarily, almost like surrendering to this passing of, in a way, and letting it go in order to like make room for a new version of you, and then be comfortable with the new version and try to keep building on that and just keep reiterating that process. It's almost like a crab or a lobster shedding, or a bird losing some feathers and whatnot, or caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It's like, I think there's something about how like caterpillars, when they metamorphose, they're like literally like liquid soup inside the cocoon. But then there's like the parts of a butterfly under construction, and one day it just pops out. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And one of the things I didn't expect in that journey was how I would feel when I had let go of the old identity. What I mean is that I felt for a little bit very lost. I'm like, I don't know who I am. And that can feel very off-putting. Like when you've let go of who you thought you were, and then you kind of stripped everything, but haven't really truly decided where you want to go next, because you're kind of allowing, like, you know, I never thought I would be doing like the podcasting, like having my own podcast and writing. Like that never even came into my consciousness. But once I opened myself up, I opened up myself to things that I absolutely love. But in my conscious awareness, I didn't even know what a podcast was. Like I like some of the things, like some of my dreams and the things I'm doing now are things I had never thought of. So when I allowed myself and said, okay, I'm going to let go of what I think I should do and who I think I should be to open myself up to infinite potentials, there were moments when I'm like, I don't know who I am. I feel very lost. I feel very confused. And to do that and not, while I'm still a parent, while I'm still a parent, while I'm still a partner, while I'm still like having to do things in my life and still like, I think I was doing some work at the time, to have to be in that space of the unknown. If you're used to, like me, controlling, and you used to be knowing because that was your safety, can feel really uncomfortable. But that's where trust comes in. You really learn to have trust and step in faith. Step to faith in the point where you're like, I don't know how this is going to happen, or I don't know where this is going to come from, or I don't even know where this money is going to come from, but I'm going to step in faith. And I'm telling you, it shows up every freaking time. And yet, it wasn't enough for me. At the time, every time I would take a step and something huge would happen, or I'm like, I don't even know where this thing's going to come from. And then it would come, and then I would be, awesome. Thank you so much, universe and higher self. And then I would have to take the next step and be like worried. I don't know how it's going to happen. And I'm like, and so at one point I was doing a meditation, and I was apologizing to my higher self universe. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't trust. I don't know why it's never enough for me to, every time I take a step in faith, every time I take those big steps, you show me that you're there. The path is there, the step is there, and it just kind of goes. And yet and I had to realize about the role that trust played in my life, or lack of trust. I didn't trust anybody. And I certainly wasn't going to trust a universe that was taking care of me if I didn't trust the adults in my life. And so trust had to be something I had to learn in this lifetime to walk in faith. And you can see in this world this lack of trust, right? That not everyone's trying to hurt me. Not everyone's trying to take advantage of me, right?
There's an interesting analogy, I think, between what's popping into my mind now is like videos of, I think there are forms of like hermit crabs. And there actually are videos you can see of hermit crabs having to, like, when they're outgrowing their shells, they don't molt the shell, they literally crawl out of it and they go find a different shell and have to hop into it. But in that in-between period of them going from shell to shell, they're vulnerable.
Yeah.
And like you can see how panicked they are, like running as fast as they can to the next shell, trying to jump to it. Because in that moment they are vulnerable, and like a fish could just come by and eat them. And it's what's interesting. I think I had a question here was the thought comes along the idea of, like we talked about, I think earlier, talking about discussion of how, like, people are intrinsically good, they're not really good or evil. From a purely, like a relatively evolutionary biological thing, there is such a thing in the world as, like, you mentioned narcissism, sociopathy, psychopathy, and things like that. And it's in those moments, it's interesting that I think that's where a lot of the damage in the world tends to come from. It's like, is that moment between you changing shells, or if your shell is not strong enough, the wrong person can come along and really do some damage. And it may not be that they're intrinsically evil people. And like I've even come to the similar conclusion, thinking like 99.999% of the people in the world are not evil. The bad ones are just misguided, or they had a problem. But I have to wonder if there's just like one or two people out there causing all the problems in the world, just by kind of like echoing and cascading these problems, like multi-generationally, or in those opportune moments where you don't know who you are and the wrong person comes along and persuades you on who you should be, and things like that.
Thank you for sort of saying this. So many thoughts were coming to my mind. I'm going to focus on two. The first one being, I love what Neville Goddard says about this. He says that people aren't evil. They just have erroneous thinking. And what I mean is, like, what he meant was that if people truly knew how much power they had, that they had the power to meet their needs without harming someone else, and that they could live their dreams still, they probably wouldn't make that choice. Like these people, like the greedy, the people that hurt other people in order to meet their needs, they think that's the only way. Think about how we have glorified like wealthy people that it's just greed. It's just a fear of lack, and it's never enough. They keep having to feed the same beast and make more money because they're still in that fear of lack. Just because they have more money doesn't mean they've left the fear. They're still from that energy and vibration. And I'm going to say something that's a little bit of a lean in. So I'm going to ask you and your listeners to lean in a little bit. So we think that there's an us and a them, but the truth of the matter is we have all contributed to the state of the world. And I really had to, one of the things I had to look is ask myself, okay, Gissele, how are you contributing to the state of the world in terms of racism, in terms of greed, in terms of all of these things? And I looked on two parts. Number one, how was I contributed to racism? The foundation of racism is othering others. The minute you are separating yourself and seeing somebody as an other, less than, or than, you are contributing to a world where racism can exist, because racism is the ultimate othering. They're less than, they're doing this to me, it's a separation. And I used to get really outraged at greedy corporations. I'm not even going to name them. I used to be so upset about how come people want to make money off the backs of other people? Why can't they, make money and be compassionate and caring and generous? And then I realized how I contributed to the problem, which was this. So I always wanted to pay as cheaply as possible because I didn't believe in my own money. I didn't believe in my own lack. So I paid as cheaply as possible for things, and I attracted businesses that wanted to give me those things as cheaply as possible, which means they weren't paying fair prices to people, which means they were relocating their businesses to different environments. And they also came from that same energy and vibration, which means they also wanted to pay for things as cheaply as possible. And so I kept reinforcing their behavior of doing these things as cheaply as possible. When I decided to change and say, the more I'm generous with my money, the more comes to me. The more I pay people fair price, the more people want to pay me fair price. When I started to shift, the people in my environment where I shop, the people that come to me, the people that I go to, changes. Because I'm no longer living from that lack place. There's abundances all around. And if I don't want to pay you generously, other people aren't going to want to pay me generously because I'm in that energy. And that is the energy that these people live under. Just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean that you feel abundant or wealthy. All of these families, you should see even how there's lots of stories about how even within themselves, there's all this infighting for money. You think you'd have enough for many lifetimes. How is this possible? Yeah. Because the vibration is one still of lack, which is why they need to keep hoarding more and more money. And so we need to shift the choices that we make. We need to shift where we buy. We need to shift how we buy. We need to have an awareness of what we're contributing to the world and what we're accepting. We continuously give our power away to other people. We are enormously powerful. We're such powerful beings. Our thoughts and feelings create our reality and what we're aligning with. But we are misusing that power. We're allowing people to tell us where we should shop. We're allowing people to determine how we feel about ourselves and our lives because of their behavior. But once we take our power back and realize we're enormously powerful, we won't need to do that, and our world will change. That's my perspective.
The irony in that, there's a really good quote I enjoy, and it's kind of one of the central themes in this podcast, is it's a phrase, I'm not sure where it came from. It's take what you want as long as you're willing to pay the price. And I think it's interesting because there's a lot of studies I've heard about where they talk about how above $80,000 a year American USD, people don't really get much happier. Because if you're dirt poor, you really don't want to be homeless if you can help it. If you're working 3 jobs, paycheck to paycheck, that's not a life either. But if you have billions of dollars, what's an extra couple billion going to even do for you anymore? And it's interesting when you mentioned about how you were looking for cheap prices, and this kind of point ties back to people wanting to support things like local businesses, where you say, okay, I can press a button online, Amazon could deliver to me in 10 seconds, and it's $5 cheaper than me driving to the store down the road. But what did you pay? It's all right, well, it's going to be $5 more to go buy it from them. But what else do you get when you go there? Well, you get to go talk to the shop owner. You get to converse with people. You get to go outside. You get to see other human beings. You get to interact with them. It's a small extra price to pay to at least continue giving yourself these kind of social interactions on a very basic basis. And the point you mentioned about people who have infighting in the families, I have a friend of mine. She is a paramedic in the Hamptons. I live in Long Island, New York. The Hamptons are like Beverly Hills of New York, basically. And she was a paramedic in that area. And the amount of stories she had of teenagers and kids overdosing on prescription drugs because they were just bored and unfulfilled, and their parents were basically ignoring them, because they were just working. They had more money they knew what to do with, and they were miserable beyond belief.
Yeah, there's no passion, no drive, no purpose, right? It's like everything is, and again, it's coming from that perspective of everything is about wealth. And most people don't want to be truly wealthy. They want to be free. Like most people, when you ask most people, okay, so what do you want to do with this money? Well, I want to be free. Okay, you can free yourself now. Live from a free place. Like, what can you do to give yourself more freedom in your life? And to be honest, workplaces have to change. The grind isn't the way. If working harder led to you being more money, all those people that work super hard will all be millionaires. So that's not true. Let's be honest. I worked very hard. I didn't get to $1 million when I was working that hard, right? And so we need to really shift our perspective about what it really truly means to be abundant and to be wealthy. It's not just the money. Yes, the money is important, especially if you are in survival mode, but it's also healthy. Abundant in health, abundant in positive relationships, abundant in your self-love and self-compassion, abundant in all of those different aspects of yourself. That's what makes an abundant life. And I think for so long we have glorified money acquisition. Think about who are the people that we admire. Are these people that are always making differences in the world? Not always. And then we get mad at the fact that these people, but we were all trying to be them. We were all trying to be all of these wealthy millionaires. But where's their compassion? Where's their love, their caring? We don't believe that those two can go hand in hand. And that's kind of the biggest myth. Yes, we can do good in the world. We can help others and be generous, and we can be abundant. They don't have to be one or the other. They can be and. And I think these individuals don't think that that's the case because they have the lack mentality. And until they shift that, they will continue to live that.
It's true. So a number of your blog posts also talk about political differences between your friends and family and things like that. Yeah. And especially I think it was like with Trump supporters and things like that. Mm-hmm. What was your journey in terms of learning to bridge the gap with people with political differences? And what would you say to people who are struggling in that regard? Because I've seen it myself with some of my family members where they have no problem lighting, not the person directly, but the idea of the person through Facebook, through Instagram. Anybody who votes for this person is just the worst person ever. That could be your next door neighbor. Yeah. That could be the mother of your child's best friend. And you're basically saying this person is the most evil person I've walked the planet, when in reality, they just have some differences and you don't want to hear what they have to say. I'm curious what you have to hear to say in this regard.
Yeah. Well, first, I want to share a little story with you about how what helped me shift. Somebody that I'm trying to get on my podcast, and I tell everybody this because I will have this person on my podcast. His name's Daryl Davis. He's a black jazz musician.
Yes. Yeah.
Black, you know? Okay, good.
The KK. You could talk about him anyway.
So I was reading his story. I actually got his book, Clandestine Relationships. And he was telling the story about how, as a kid, he was always curious. He's like, why are people racist? It didn't make sense in his head because he lived in many different environments. And when he was older, he decided to ask. So black jazz musician would go to KKK leaders and rallies, and he would just say, why do you hate me when you don't even know me? And in those conversations, through that dialogue, he got over 200 of them to leave the Klan. But the key part of the story that really struck me was that he wasn't trying to change them. He was trying to understand them. And in that understanding, he created the conditions that enabled them to change. And so I thought to myself, how often am I curious about the people in my life with whom I disagree? How often am I just open enough to try to understand the perspective? And so the blog you're talking about was when I interviewed some people that I knew that were Trump supporters. And through the conversation, from their perspective, they had rational perspectives. There was a lack of trust in terms of government and regular media, which you see now a lot on TikTok and a lot on media just in general. There was certain resonance with the particular person, but fundamentally, when I chatted with those people, we all wanted the same things. We wanted to be safe, to be free. And we're listening to anyone that would have, from their perspective, guaranteed their family's safety, their family's well-being. There was also a strong sense of nationality in the particular group. And so for them, it was about, why am I going to help other people when we can't even help our own people? Like, there's homelessness, there's all of these things. So there were some fair points that I couldn't disagree with. And so, and I don't know anything about Trump. I only know what the media has shown me. And so what happened during that conversation is I enabled myself to be open to the different perspective without the need for it to change me or my desire to change them. It was just a desire to understand. And that's, I think, when I realized that I think the reason why there is such a challenge in dialogue is that people are afraid of being changed. They hold so staunchly to their beliefs because I think there's a true fear there. Because I went into that conversation saying, I'm willing to be open. I'm willing to change my mind. I'm willing to change my heart. I'm just open. And that willingness, in the end, I didn't change my mind or my perspective. I just heard their perspective. It had no impact on me. But I think what happens in that dialogue is that people are so afraid that they're going to get their mind changed. Is that they dig in their heels. Because otherwise, why would you be so, if you really didn't believe what they said was true, why would you care what they say? It's their perspective, unless you thought you could be impacted by it. And again, that's you giving your power away to that. So that conversation was really great because I learned a lot about myself and what I had been doing in the past in terms of being closed in resistance to different ideas, and that my defensiveness came from fear, and that being curious from a place of non-judgment enabled me to learn much more about my fellow human beings, especially human beings that had different perspectives from me. And I think that's the beauty of compassion, because when there were times when people, like individuals, said things that triggered me, I was able to hold space for myself through compassion. I was able to hold those difficult emotions without the need to eject. I was able to understand, okay, why am I being triggered when they're saying this and this about this person? And I would say to myself, oh, okay, if I'm being triggered, there's something within me that needs to be healed. That's okay. I'm just going to allow compassion to soothe it and allow it without resistance. And so that enabled me to stay in the conversation longer when there were things that I didn't like or appreciate. And so, and ask myself, okay, once I was able to address those emotions, I would ask myself, okay, what's the gift in this moment? What am I supposed to learn from this challenging conversation? And then when I would open myself up that way, sometimes unexpected things would come into my head or my heart. And I'll be like, oh, okay, that's what I'm supposed to learn. Wow. Yikes. And so it enabled me to sit with that conversation longer. And this is why I'm so staunchly, I guess you would say, well, not that staunchly, kind of loosely passionate about how compassion can help us have difficult conversations.
Yeah, I think in some crazy way, it's a very uniquely human attribute to be compassionate. There's a really good book, author Jonathan Haidt. There's a book called The Righteous Mind, and he talks about the reason on like a evolutionary psychological perspective, the reasons for a lot of the political divide in the country, just from the perspective of how we evolved as we did. And one thing in particular that's very prominent in psychology, whether we realize it or not, is this desire to be accepted by the group basically for the sake of survival purposes. So it's like, if your car broke down and you were driving through a town, your car broke down, you were like a staunch Biden, Hillary supporter, and you just see Trump flags everywhere, and you'd be like, for the next few minutes, I might be a Trump supporter because I might need some help and I don't want to get into a fight.
Yeah, fair
or
enough.
Something along those lines. But it basically ties back to like this fear, like this deep subconscious fear of a rejection from the group, in that you'll end up adopting your thinking to other people around you without even realizing whether or not you really truly agree with the actual concepts or ideas in there, just for the sake of your own survival. So I think it ties in interestingly into this concept of like recognizing that if you're feeling a particular thing and someone is challenging your perspective, that feeling that you're feeling of having a change is part of your brain saying like, make sure that if you do agree with this, that you're going to still be alive, because I don't want the group or the village or the tribe to kick you out for agreeing with this or disagreeing with this, because like I'd rather you be something you don't agree with and survive than not survive.
Oh, I love that you said that, because it made me think. I think that explains kind of the conflict in discourse. Because if you're saying something that we disagree with, then maybe I don't belong. Maybe, and so I'm going to try to get you to come here so that we belong together, so that there's not that distance, or maybe I'm not wrong, or maybe I'm not unworthy. So I do love that you said that. I want to share a story of belonging, because I eventually found that when I belong to myself, I fit anywhere. But it was a hard pressed thing for me to learn. Because I didn't trust anyone, I was so protected. I would always walk around with an armor on. And so I would reject people before they rejected me, which means I would go into groups and think, oh, they're not going to accept me. And I would actually kind of criticize people, would be like, oh, they're this and this or this and that, so therefore I don't want to be with them. But once I started the practice of self-love and self-compassion, I literally I'm just going to open myself up to whatever comes up.
Thank you for joining us today. If you found us informative, thought-provoking, or learned something new, please leave a review or a comment and tell a friend about the podcast. Feedback means the world to me, as I want to make this the best possible podcast that it can be, and to help others identify the causes of and solutions to problems in their own lives and villages. Until next time, let's keep working on rebuilding the village.